I came home after 14 hours of grinding work at the construction site, my head still spinning from the contractor meeting. The smell of grease, sweat, and steel dust clung to my faded flannel shirt. The same one my wife always complained was impossible to wash clean. But tonight, I wasn't in the mood to argue. I just wanted a decent dinner with her. Maybe that Southern-style roast chicken she used to make every Wednesday. The kitchen light was still on, but the dishes had already been washed. A single plate of food, wrapped in plastic, sat alone in the microwave. Silence. No music, no TV, no "how was the site today" like before. The two-story wooden house on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon, suddenly felt colder than the March air outside. I took off my boots at the door, stepping inside to the creak of floorboards that sounded more like a warning than a welcome. My wife, Natalie, was in the living room, eyes glued to her phone. As I passed, she flipped the screen face down. "You're late again," she said, her voice as detached as a weather report. "Not angry, not even curious." I nodded, took off my jacket, voice raspy from the dust. The Southside commercial project ran into issues with the steel supplier. I spent the whole afternoon renegotiating. She didn't respond, just sipped her orange juice and slightly furrowed her brow as I reheated the dinner. I used to believe that after 13 years of marriage we could read each other without speaking. But now, I feared this silence more than any argument. We met when I was a site supervisor for a local firm, and she was an accountant for a restaurant chain. Back then, I had nothing but two hands and a dream of starting my own construction company. Natalie was the first person who believed in me, even when her parents disapproved, calling me the guy from the red dirt and unfinished sites. 7 years later, those same parents were raising glasses at the Northridge Engineering anniversary party, the year we crossed 7 figures in revenue. I thought, finally, they see I'm worthy of their daughter. And I didn't build it alone. My best friend, Caleb Foster, stood beside me since college. We met in a structural engineering class in Portland, then worked together on small-scale projects across the suburbs. When I launched my business at 36, Caleb pulled nearly $30,000 from savings to invest. In return, he held 20% equity, and from then on, we were two gears driving the same machine. Caleb wasn't just a partner. He'd held me the night my mother died, carried me home after my bachelor party, and became godfather to my son, Mason, now a sophomore in architecture at UCLA. Together, we didn't just build a company. We built a life. From a 2-room rental to a 3,200 square foot timber frame home backed by pine woods. I used to think that between Natalie, Caleb, and me, we had something stronger than the concrete I poured into our foundations. An unbreakable triangle. But the moment Natalie started hiding her phone, the moment her eyes darted like a guilty thief's, I knew. Even the smallest crack, if ignored, could bring down an entire structure. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but my instincts, honed by years of blueprint scrutiny and risk assessment, were sending alarms. Something was off. Something rotten beneath the polished surface. I set the dinner on the table and ate alone. Natalie went upstairs early, saying she was tired. I sat there, staring at the framed family photo hanging in the dining room. 3 of us, smiling wide beneath the golden light of Cannon Beach. In that photo, I was holding my wife. Caleb stood beside us, his arm over Mason's shoulder like a proud uncle. I didn't know then that the man standing next to me would one day be the reason everything I built would come crashing down. Ever since that night, Natalie flipped her phone over. I started noticing everything. Habits that once seemed routine now felt calculated. Leaving the table early, phone always in hand, disappearing every Thursday night with that same canvas bag. When I asked, she said, book club, but I remembered clearly. Natalie never finished a single novel when we were dating. She once told me, books are all fantasy or crime. We've lived enough reality. So when she suddenly became a fan of postmodern feminist literature, I didn't find it amusing. I found it suspicious. I didn't confront her, I observed. One evening, after a contractor meeting in Salem ran late, I pulled into our driveway and saw Caleb's truck parked outside. The kitchen lights were on, windows fogged. I stayed in the car, engine off, heart pounding. I couldn't hear them, but I saw their shadows, sitting closer than necessary. Caleb handed her a drink, and when she laughed, she touched his arm lightly. A brief touch, yet unmistakable to any man who's been through the battlefield of life. I didn't storm in, I waited. When I entered, I acted like nothing was off. Caleb stood immediately. I dropped off the revised rental contracts. Natalie was just boiling water. I shook his hand and felt his palm cold. My gut told me he'd been standing outside a while, maybe second-guessing, maybe ashamed. "You still drink that special cold brew I make?" I asked, smiling, eyes locked. "Of course, your coffee's unforgettable," he smiled, but his eyes didn't. After that, Caleb dropped by more often, especially on days I had to visit Bend for project inspections. One day, a meeting got canceled last minute. I came home early. As I stepped past the backyard fence, I found Caleb fiddling with the garden faucet. Natalie stood nearby with a towel, both of them laughing like contestants on a home renovation show. "You know the plumber I hired's from Louisiana, right?" I said, walking over with a smile. "He usually finishes before I'm done with my beer." Caleb stood. Voice dropped. "I was just passing by. Saw Natalie struggling and offered to help." Natalie stayed silent, just looked down, pretending to clean hands that were already spotless. From that day on, I started checking our security cameras, not to stir trouble, but to review footage when I wasn't around. I found at least 4 instances in 2 weeks when Caleb came by while I was gone. Once, he stayed nearly 2 hours. No paperwork, no business reason. I didn't confront them. I started documenting everything. One night, when Natalie left with her usual bag, I followed. Kept my distance. Her old gray sedan turned into a quiet neighborhood about 4 blocks from home. No libraries, no community centers. Just private homes with yellow porch lights and wooden fences. She parked in front of a small house with a red tile roof. The door opened seconds later. Caleb stepped out. The porch light lit his face clearly. No hugs, no physical contact. But the way they looked at each other, I wanted to throw my steering wheel through the windshield. I took 2 photos, then drove away like I was never there. That night, I said nothing. Just poured a glass of bourbon, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began writing an email. To my attorney, Mr. Daniel Hunt. Things had gone too far to ignore. Caleb hadn't just crossed the line between friend and traitor. He stepped into a place I could never forgive. The game had begun. But this time, I didn't come to build. I came to dismantle every brick they thought I couldn't see. That night, I left the site earlier than usual. The Eastern project had been paused due to forest land legal issues. No more reason to linger at the office until 9. On the way home, I stopped by a familiar shop on 17th Avenue to pick up a bundle of dried lavender. Natalie once said the scent reminded her of our first date at the Riverside farm. I figured maybe a small gesture could soften things. We had survived instant noodles and shared rent. Surely we could survive a cold season like this. But the moment I pushed open the door, all those thoughts died right at the threshold. No sound of water boiling, no trace of the orange essential oil Natalie always diffused in the evenings, just a silence that cut to the bone. Like I had walked into someone else's home, not the place where I laid the foundation, hung our wedding photo, ran my hands along walls before the paint had dried. I set the lavender bundle on the counter, took off my jacket, and saw her phone left behind on the kitchen table. The screen lit up with a new message. The words glowed clearly. "Delete this. I left my jacket in your room. Don't let Christopher see." Sender, Caleb. I didn't get angry right away. Instead, I went cold, like someone dropped into an ice lake. Every nerve in my body froze, except my eyes, reading that message over and over until every word carved itself into memory. I picked up the phone, took a screenshot, and gently placed it back where it was. I didn't delete anything. Didn't touch a single app. I walked upstairs. My hand didn't shake, but my heart beat sharp and steady like a nail being driven into wood. The bedroom door wasn't locked. I pushed it open gently. The hinge let out a dry, stiff creak. Natalie turned around. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a brown leather jacket, the limited edition one I gave Caleb for his 42nd birthday. When her eyes met mine, her expression wasn't fear. It was caught, awkward, guilty, but not surprised. "You're home early," she whispered, then went quiet. She didn't drop the jacket, didn't hide her hands, didn't rush to explain. I simply raised the phone and showed her the lit screen with the message. Natalie looked at it, then gave a faint nod. No denial, no excuses. "How long?" I asked, my voice deeper than I expected. She stayed silent. A few moments passed before she exhaled, barely audible. "About 4 months. I don't remember what I said after that. Maybe nothing. I just remember turning around and walking back down the stairs, step by step, like someone carrying out a sentence he'd already accepted. Downstairs, I sank into the armchair where I usually read the Sunday paper, phone still in my hand. Part of me wanted to call Caleb right away, unleash every insult I'd ever bottled up against the liar I once called brother. But another part, colder, sharper, told me to wait. Men like Caleb aren't destroyed by fury. They're crushed by something they never prepare for. A plan. I got up, walked into my office, opened the small safe under my desk, and pulled out the original investment documents Caleb signed when we launched the company. There was a clause I had insisted on including when we were just starting, back when no one believed we'd ever need it. It protected the company's equity against any action causing serious harm to image, ethics, or reputation. I didn't know exactly how I would use it, but I knew this, tonight, was the starting line. I left Natalie in the bedroom, didn't enter, didn't argue. We weren't divorced yet, but the marriage had fractured beyond repair. That night, lying on the office couch, staring at the dark ceiling, I didn't feel rage burning. What I felt was an icy clarity. I had built an entire business from nothing, learned to negotiate every dollar, and navigate every clause. Now I would use those same skills on something personal. Not to salvage, but to rebuild. On the rubble they thought they could hide from me. For the next 3 days, I lived exactly how a betrayed man would. Outwardly calm, inwardly roaring. I left the house on schedule, showed up to the sites, joked with engineers like usual. But every move I made served a larger plan. To bring down Caleb Foster. Not with fists, but with the clause he had signed 17 years ago. I called Everett Kane on the third night, when the house had gone dark and only the faint hum of the floor heater remained. He was the corporate lawyer I trusted most, the one who drafted every document from the days when Northridge was just 2 employees and a second-hand truck. "I need you to confirm something," I said, eyes still on the security camera feed showing Natalie walking out of the house 12 minutes ago. "The clause about reputation damage in Caleb's equity agreement, is it still enforceable?" "Still solid, clause 12.2. Want me to start drafting?" "I want to start immediately." The next morning at Everett's office, I handed over all the evidence. Images of Caleb frequently entering my house when I was away, messages from Natalie's phone, car location logs. He looked through them carefully, nodding. "It's enough to trigger the clause, but if you want to shut this down completely, we'll need more." "I've thought of that," I said. "I need someone to audit every transaction Caleb's touched in the last 3 years." I called Olivia Mendez, a forensic auditor I'd hired during our early expansion years. She was known for being meticulous and discreet, rare qualities. When I explained the situation, she simply said, "Give me 4 days." 3 days later, she sent me a neatly bound report titled, "Operational Expense Irregularities, C. Foster." I met her at her private office on the 3rd floor of a red brick building near the old steel bridge. Olivia pulled out a summary sheet and pointed, "Hillsborough Housing Development, excavator rental was reported as $61,000. But the actual contract states $44,500. The $17,000 difference was paid through a middleman company registered under Diane Foster." "Caleb's ex-wife?" I asked, my chest sinking. "Yes, but the primary spending account is at another bank." The secondary card, tied to that account, is under the name Natalie Chapman. I didn't need to ask anything else. Olivia closed the file and slid it toward me. Total suspected embezzlement, $158,000. Spread across numerous small transactions. Systematic. Deliberate. I took the report without saying a word. In my mind, every puzzle piece had fallen into place. That afternoon, I sent a full copy of the file to Everett. 24 hours later, he completed the paperwork to force Caleb's equity buyout under Clause 12.2, valued at just 1/5 of its actual market worth. I called Caleb, asked him to meet me at the company office. Not in the main conference room, but the records archive. A closed, windowless space where no one would overhear. He arrived on time. Same familiar look, leather jacket, slicked back hair, acting like nothing was wrong. "I need you to sign this," I said, sliding the folder across. He flipped a few pages and scoffed. "An equity buyout? Are you kidding? I've got no reason to walk away from this company." "I think you should read the last appendix carefully," I said, pulling a USB from my pocket. "Or I could forward this to finance along with a copy for the tax office." Caleb paused, hands slightly trembling as he pulled out the appendix. As he scanned Olivia's audit details, I watched the color drain from his face. "You think you can use this to threaten me?" "I'm not threatening you," I replied. "I'm giving you a clean way out. Sign this, walk away from the company, keep quiet, and I'll keep everything under wraps. Or you can take your chances." He said nothing else. Just sat there, took a deep breath, and signed. I stood up. No handshake, no goodbye. As I walked out of that room, I knew one thing. My counterattack had only just begun. But Caleb was already off the board. I called Caleb on Monday morning, right around the time he usually stopped by the office after hitting the gym. I chose that hour deliberately. People resist most when they're full of energy, and panic quickest when they realize they've wasted it. "Can you meet with me this afternoon?" I asked on the phone, my tone so calm I almost didn't recognize it. "What's so urgent?" Caleb replied, still out of breath. "Probably just finished a cardio session. I need to discuss an internal clause. It concerns your equity." He hesitated for a few seconds. "I thought we finalized all the financial allocations last month." "This is more serious. I'll wait for you at 5 p.m., downstairs in the records room." I hung up before he could ask anything else. At 4:50, I was already seated in the windowless room. On the table were two folders. One was the dissolution agreement under Clause 12.2. The other was a full copy of Olivia's audit report. At exactly 5 o'clock, Kayla walked in, looking relaxed like it was just another routine meeting. He sat down across from me, legs crossed, glanced over the first folder, and raised an eyebrow. "What's this? You trying to push me out of the company?" "I'm not pushing anyone. I'm executing a legal right based on your own actions." He smirked. "So this is about contracts now? Over a few texts and some childish jealousy?" I slid the second folder toward him. "It's not just texts. This is a financial audit of the past 3 years. You submitted fake invoices, siphoned company funds into a shadow account under your ex-wife's name. The amount totals more than $158,000. And I've got the proof." Caleb scoffed, but didn't reach for the file. "You think you can blackmail me with this? That's all operational expense. I can explain everything to an independent auditor or maybe the federal financial investigators," I said. The confidence on his face began to crack. His eyes paused as I placed a USB drive on the table. "I've got copies of every transaction, including emails you sent to vendors I never authorized." "So what do you want?" he asked, voice lower, sharper. "Step down. Sign the dissolution. Your equity will be bought out at the rate specified for ethical violations, 20% of current value. Based on the latest Northridge valuation, that means you'll receive $124,000. "What?" Caleb snapped. "My shares are worth at least $600,000. That's if you walked out with integrity. But you're now classified as a liability to the company's reputation. The rate was outlined from day one." His fists clenched. I saw his knuckles go pale as he held something back. "You're kicking me out of the company I helped build over some personal drama?" "This isn't personal, Caleb. You didn't just sleep with my wife. You stole money from the business we built and used it to fund a lie. You didn't betray me. You betrayed every principle we said we stood for. The room fell so quiet it felt like the oxygen had been drained from the walls. Caleb stood, took a few steps toward the door, then turned back, eyes red, voice barely holding steady. And if I don't sign? I'll submit all this to the IRS and the company board. Result, you'll lose everything and face a federal investigation. Maybe even charges. I'm not bluffing. This is real. This is the law. He stared at me for a long moment. I didn't look away. Finally, Caleb sat down, pulled a pen from his jacket, and signed. I didn't thank him. Just gathered the documents, folded them neatly, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, like the end of an era. When I returned to the main office, Everett was waiting in his car with the equity transfer papers. I handed him the signed folder. No words needed. We looked at each other for 1 second. Then he nodded. That was clean. Surgical. I said nothing. My mind was no longer on Caleb. It was on Natalie, who now had no stake in Northridge, no leverage, and nothing left but the illusion of safety in a home where betrayal once bloomed. I had taken back my company. Now it was time to reclaim my dignity. Caleb signed the dissolution papers on Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had revoked all his access to the internal management systems, deactivated his company email, recalled his office key card, and issued a staff-wide notice to all mid-level management. The reason given: equity restructuring. Tight, legal, and vague enough to deflect curiosity. I didn't have time to waste answering pointless questions. Caleb was no longer the threat. The real danger was erosion of trust from clients who'd stood with me for nearly 2 decades. Northridge was never just a construction brand. To our long-term partners, we were a symbol of integrity. Built through every handshake, every on-time handover, every 6 a.m. meeting in the snow. That trust couldn't be allowed to fracture. Especially not after betrayal from the man I once called brother. I started with the toughest client, Lamar Benson, CEO of Delta West Developers, the group that made up 32% of Northridge's annual revenue. He was reserved, unpredictable, and highly sensitive to leadership changes. I arranged to meet Lamar at the Sheraton Bar, the same place we celebrated the Springfield Plaza handover 42 days ahead of schedule. He was already there when I arrived, sipping his usual straight whiskey. Without small talk, he looked up and asked, "Where's Caleb?" I sat down, eyes steady, stepped down under contract clause, due to conduct issues. Lamar didn't blink, just gave a slight nod and continued. "Any impact on the Fairmont project?" "None," I said immediately. "I've reviewed the entire schedule myself. Materials, labor, timeline. Everything's on track. I'll be personally overseeing the deep foundation work next week." He took another sip, set the glass down. "I don't work with your company. I work with you. Don't make me say that again." I knew. Right then, I'd just secured the heart of our revenue stream. 3 days later, I met with representatives from the other 3 major partners: Berkeley Construction, Summit Elevation, and Red River Buildco. At each meeting, I proactively presented a new memorandum. The construction contracts would be amended to no longer be tied to Northridge as a legal entity, but instead directly under my name, Christopher Hale. That meant if anything happened to the company, the terms would remain valid based on my personal reputation and accountability. A risky move, but a necessary one. And I didn't come in empty-handed. Before each meeting, I had the legal team prepare a personal guarantee backed by my own financial collateral, partly from stock I'd held in my investment portfolio for 12 years, and partly from the house on the hill south of Eugene, which I'd fully paid off last year. I didn't just retain 80% of annual revenue. I renewed their trust. That night, back at home, I stood in the garage where the first reflective vest I ever wore still hung from the pegboard. I took it down, held it in my hands like a survivor surveying the battlefield he'd just walked through. No financial magazine ever writes that trust has a dollar value. But I knew. It's the one thing you can't sell once it's lost. I opened my laptop, checked the project tracker, and sent out a company-wide internal announcement. Northridge Engineering is entering a restructuring phase. From today forward, All technical and financial decisions will be overseen directly by the founder. If any of you have questions about the company's future, ask me directly. Within 12 minutes, I received over 40 emails. Not questions. Gratitude. Relief. At 11 p.m., I got a text from Natalie's number. I heard Caleb left the company. What did you do to him? I didn't respond. She once asked me, years ago after we lost a big bid, are you ever afraid of losing everything? Back then I laughed and said, I'm not afraid of losing, I'm afraid of not knowing how to rebuild. Now I knew I didn't just know how to rebuild. I knew how to hold firm even when the storm came from inside the house. That afternoon, while sorting through Caleb's old paperwork in the garage, stuff I planned to burn, I heard a familiar sound outside. Tires crunching gently on gravel, a car door closing, then footsteps stopping just outside the front door. Natalie had returned. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't prepared either. She stood at the threshold, clutching her bag, eyes filled with hesitation like someone entering a place they no longer belong. I wiped my hands on a rag, nodded once, and walked straight out to the backyard. If she wanted to talk, she'd follow. If not, even better. 5 minutes later, I heard the back door open. Natalie stood there on the old concrete slab, between the scent of pine wood and sawdust. Christopher, she said softly, we need to talk. I set the timber down on the table and turned around. About what? About how you and Caleb destroyed this marriage? Or about the company money he used to take you to weekend spas? Natalie paled, but didn't back away. I didn't know about the money. I really didn't know. I stepped closer, my voice low but heavy. You think he took you to lakeside resorts, booked dinners at Meriden, rented Range Rovers for the weekend? With what? His shares were leveraged 2 years ago. You think Caleb's just generous with his own pocket? She stepped back slightly but tried to stay composed. I know I messed up, but I didn't come here to apologize. I came to ask, after all this, is there any chance to fix it? I stared at her for a long time. She had once been the woman I loved most, the first person who believed in me when I was just a frame carpenter with a dream, the one who helped me save every cent to buy our first home. But the woman standing here now wasn't that Natalie anymore. Too much had broken that no apology could glue back together. I filed for divorce, I said. The paperwork was submitted last week. My lawyer will send a copy to yours. She stood still for a moment, then asked, almost in disbelief, so it's really over? It was over the moment you let Caleb walk into this house like I didn't exist. Natalie nodded, eyes red, but still clinging to something. I know there's a prenup, but after nearly 14 years of marriage, I still have a right to some of what we built. I was here too. I cut her off, not out of anger, but because I couldn't let her keep believing that lie. You should reread the agreement, clause 9.3. If either party commits adultery, the other retains full rights to all marital assets. She shook her head, nearly whispering. That prenup, it was just to appease my parents. I didn't think you took it seriously. I didn't think you'd give me a reason to. The air between us thickened. Natalie sat down on the bench by the lumber pile and stayed quiet for a long time. So what do I get? She asked, barely louder than the wind against the old wooden door. The cabin in Mount Hood, the one you liked, and 6 months of living support. Enough to start over, but not enough for you and Caleb to enjoy what I worked for. Just saying his name made her flinch. Caleb isn't in my life anymore, she said, voice trembling. I know. You forced him out of the company? Hell walked, I replied, eyes cold as steel. Or more accurately, he was exposed. I didn't do anything but offer him a choice. She looked at me for a long time, then sighed suddenly. So both of us lost everything. I crossed my arms. I didn't nod. I didn't deny it. Caleb told me, it was all just feelings, that you didn't care about me anymore. Then you should ask him if those feelings were worth $158,000. I wasn't trying to hurt her, but the truth, even cruel, is still the most accurate weapon. She stood up, didn't cry, but her eyes said she understood. Not because of what I said, but because, for the first time in her life, Natalie saw what it cost to lose someone not easily replaced. "Wish you peace," she whispered, then turned and left. I didn't answer. The back door clicked shut behind her like a final period that needed no follow-up. 4 weeks after my final conversation with Natalie, I got a call from Victor Langston, the chief strategy officer of one of the biggest construction conglomerates on the West Coast, Everstrong Holdings. We'd met once at a conference in Sacramento, where both of us were invited to speak about managing large-scale construction operations. Back then, I'd dismissed him as the kind of executive who made big speeches but never got his hands dirty. I was wrong. Victor didn't make small talk. He got straight to the point. "Christopher, I heard Northridge is undergoing internal restructuring. The restructuring is done. I'm now focused on operations. That's exactly why I'm calling. We want to acquire it." I leaned back in my chair and stayed silent for a few seconds. I used to think that if anyone ever offered to buy my company, my first reaction would be a firm no. But instead, I asked, "How much?" "Twice its current book value," he said without hesitation. "We want your engineering team, your client network, and most importantly, your name in the industry." I said nothing. Victor continued, "But there's one condition. You stay on as technical director for 24 months. After that, you're free to retire or take on an advisory role." I asked for 48 hours to think it over. Instead of going to the office, I got in my truck and drove straight to the cabin in the hills north of Hood River. It used to be Natalie's favorite weekend spot. Now, it was the only place where I could actually hear myself think. I sat on the porch, looked out at the pine trees, shifting in the seasonal wind, and thought about everything. 2 decades of effort, the first contract signed on borrowed plywood desks, nights sleeping on job sites to oversee concrete pours, cold mornings jump-starting crews with coffee from a beat-up gas stove. And I thought about Caleb. If he knew the company was being valued at over $16 million, would he still have mocked me for clinging too hard to ethics? The next morning, I called Victor back. "Send the draft." A week later, we signed at the official law firm. Victor came with 2 attorneys. I brought Everett and Northridge's head accountant. On the table was a stack of documents thicker than the Portland commercial zone deal I once thought was the biggest of my life. Transaction value, $16.8 million, with the condition that I stay for 2 years to manage transition and maintain client stability. I signed every page like I was closing a chapter no one saw coming. Just as the pen left the final page, my phone buzzed. Caller ID, Caleb Foster. I answered without speaking. His breath was uneven. "You? Sold the company? I signed 3 minutes ago. Why wasn't I notified I had the right to make a buyback offer?" "You did," I replied calmly, "until you signed the equity dissolution for ethics violations. That clause. 17 years ago, remember?" He went quiet, then gave a bitter laugh. "You really did me like that? You did it to yourself, Caleb. How much did you sell for? I don't see why I should report to someone with no equity. Christopher, I helped build Northridge, and then tore it down with your own hands." The line went dead. I hung up without waiting. That afternoon, I drove away from the office with a copy of the contract in my leather briefcase. I stopped at an old roadside diner I hadn't visited in years. I ordered the same meal I had the day Northridge signed its first major contract. Ham sandwich, white bread, extra spicy mustard. The server didn't recognize me. Good. I sat alone in the corner, watching cars pass on the highway, feeling something strange. Relief? Northridge was no longer mine, but the value I'd built in it, integrity, trust, reputation, those stayed with me, not the nameplate. That's the one thing Caleb could never steal. I opened my phone and read a message from Thomas, my son. "Dad, I'm coming home this weekend. Want to go fishing?" I replied, "Always free for you." One life just closed, but it didn't collapse. It opened a new chapter, where I was no longer a CEO, no longer the man holding up an entire company, but someone who had walked through betrayal, held on to his principles, and stepped away from the game as the winner. A year after I sold Northridge to Everstrong, the wooden house I built beside Trillium Lake was finally complete. Not too big, not flashy, but with a porch facing the water and a small shop out back where I spent hours restoring a 1966 Ford Mustang, my father's gift before he passed. I lived here alone, not because I had no one, but because I chose to. Every morning, I brewed coffee with the old metal filter from our first kitchen, opened the door before the sun crested the mountain. I once thought I'd never sleep soundly again after all that happened. But strangely enough, the sleep I got here was deeper than any luxury hotel I ever stayed in during my project years. News about Caleb and Natalie reached me occasionally, just enough to form a clear picture. Their affair didn't last more than half a year after I cut ties. Caleb, stripped of reputation and equity, tried to launch a light equipment rental business in Tacoma. But in the Northwest construction world, names tied to embezzlement don't fade quickly. Contractors avoided him like he was radioactive. The company folded in under 6 months. Unpaid debts, no takers. I heard later he moved to Idaho Falls and took a field engineer job at a small firm. No more executive titles, no luxury car, no flashy connections. The man who used to slap me on the back in every meeting, who laughed loudest at our 10th company anniversary, now reports to people a decade younger than him. And Natalie? She moved to Spokane, living off the divorce settlement I once agreed to enough to restart her life, but not enough to indulge recklessly. I'm not sure what she's done since. A few mutual friends from the past said she seems quieter now, less social, no longer posting online. I haven't checked her accounts. Not out of anger, just no need. One time, while I was replacing a saw blade in the shop, my son found this in the mailbox, he said. No sender name, but I think you should see it. I opened it. Inside was a small piece of paper with just one sentence. I wish I had understood you better before I lost you. I folded it, put it in a drawer, and didn't respond. Thomas didn't ask anything. He understood. He was the only one left untouched by that war. He saw me fall, then rise, without needing anyone to pull me up. That night, the two of us sat fishing by the lake. We didn't talk much, just let time pass between the sound of splashing fish and moonlight shimmering on the water. There are things I've lost forever. A family, a friend I once trusted like blood, a company I poured my youth into. But after it all, I still held on to the most important thing, myself. I didn't fight back to see them fall. I did it to reclaim justice for myself. To show them some lines are not meant to be crossed without consequence. If anyone asked me, do I regret taking that path? My answer would be no, because some lessons cost blood, sweat, and tears. But they make you stronger, sharper, and help you see what's real and what's just a mirage built on misplaced faith. Now I live slower. I no longer check emails at 3 a.m., no longer calculate every expense for every project. I drink coffee, listen to the pines, and spend whole mornings rereading old journal pages. The only things left that remember the version of Christopher who once naively believed loyalty was unshakable. Not everyone who starts with you will stay until the end, but if the last person standing is you, then you never really lost. I lost what was never real, and kept what was worth it. An expensive lesson, but worth every penny. Christopher's story is living proof that sometimes loss isn't the end, it's the beginning of a stronger version of yourself. He didn't just survive betrayal from his wife and best friend. He held on to his dignity, reputation, and assets with rare clarity and resolve. In the real world, that lesson matters more than ever. Trust wisely, protect your values, and remember, justice doesn't need noise, only precision and timing. What do you think of Christopher's choice? Does he deserve sympathy or admiration? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more powerful, true life stories about family and love.